Hi, welcome to Out There, an Unexplained podcast. I'm your host Trevor, and on the last day of each month, I come out with a new episode focused on an unexplained event or phenomena that I find interesting or weird. Make sure to follow the podcast on Instagram at Out There Unexplained to check out the posts I make for each episode and maybe send some suggestions you'd like to hear. Today, we'll be diving into the mystery of London's most notorious serial killer. And I must warn, the content discussed in this episode is graphic and not for the faint of heart, so viewer discretion is advised. Jack the Ripper was a gruesome killer that only went after women of the night, but who was Jack the Ripper? That's what we're going to discuss today. Let's dive in. Jack the Ripper is the first serial killer, at least the way we see serial killers now. Each of his murders took place in the Whitechapel district of London, as far as we know. He was active from August to November of 1888. There have only been 5 official killings from the Whitechapel Ripper. These are also known as the Canonical 5. We're going to cover these murders in an abridged timeline before getting into the theories. Jack the Ripper's first victim was Mary Ann Nichols.
It was a quiet night in the Whitechapel district. Being just before the witching hour, not many were wandering the streets. Only a few we could be sure of. Mary, her friend Emily, and a stranger. Though the night had paid out well for Mary, she confided in her friend that she'd spent it all. After some shared moments, they went their separate ways, Mary refusing to return to a previously visited inn. Wandering the streets alone, Mary Ann Nichols was approached by a stranger.
"Sorry to bother, madam. I couldn't help but overhear. You are a woman of the night, yes?"
"For the right price, perhaps I am."
"I also heard you saying you need somewhere to stay tonight."
"It seems so. What's it to you, mister?"
Jack pauses for a minute, as to think of what to say next.
"Lucky for you, I have plenty of coin and an extra room. I live in the northeast. What do you say?"
Mary stands quietly for a moment.
"I guess a warm bed wouldn't be too bad, even if it is from a stranger. Lead the way."
The stranger had brewed his devilish plan, concocting it from the very beginning. He knew once they neared Buck's Row, the show would begin. The stranger paused, as if contemplating something.
"I must ask, do you ever get worried by the men you bring around?"
"Not particularly. Why?"
"Because you never know what kind of demons they could be harboring."
The stranger pulled a blade from his coat and lunged at Mary, slashing at her throat first and bringing her to the ground. No sound was made, no screams. He made sure of that. Once he was certain she'd stay down, he slammed the blade into her abdomen and pulled it across. Before the sun would rise that day, the stranger would lay her body in a gateway on Buck's Row, and Jack the Ripper's horrific crimes would be underway.
Mary Ann Nichols was found at approximately 3:40 a.m. on Buck's Row, a street that runs parallel to the main Whitechapel street. Llewellyn, the surgeon they had come out to look at the body, observed that 2 deep knife wounds had been inflicted to the woman's throat, and quickly pronounced her dead, determining through the fact her body and legs were still warm that she had been dead for approximately 30 minutes. He then had them move the body to the Old Montague Street mortuary where he would make a full examination of it. Upon further examination, Dr. Llewellyn discovered that both sides of her face had been bruised by either a fist or the pressure of a thumb before her throat wounds had been inflicted from left to right. One of these 2 wounds measured 8 inches and the other 4 inches in length. Both reached back to her vertebral column. Her vagina had been stabbed twice, and her abdomen had been mutilated with 1 deep, jagged wound. 2 or 3 inches from the left side. Several incisions had also been inflicted across her abdomen, causing her bowels to protrude through the wounds, and 3 or 4 similar cuts ran down the right side of her body. These cuts had also been inflicted with the same knife, estimated to be at least 6 to 8 inches long, 15 to 20 centimeters, and possibly a cork cutter or shoemaker's knife. Each wound had been inflicted in a violent and downward thrusting manner. Llewellyn stated that his belief was that the murderer possessed some anatomical knowledge. He estimated that these injuries would have taken 4 or 5 minutes to complete, and also expressed his surprise at the small amount of blood at the crime scene, about enough to fill 2 large wine glasses or half a pint at the outside. He believed Nichols had been facing her attacker when he held his hand across her mouth before cutting her throat. Death would have been instantaneous, and all her abdominal injuries, which would have taken less than 5 minutes to perform, were made by the murderer after she was dead. Llewellyn was able to determine this fact because wounds inflicted to an individual's body after death do not result in blood spattering and may not result in an extensive amount of blood loss from the body. An examination of Nichols's possessions revealed she carried no form of identification at the time of her death, with her sole possessions being a white pocket handkerchief, a comb, and a piece of a mirror. However, her petticoats were marked Lambeth Workhouse, PR, indicating she may have resided at the workhouse on Princess Road, which had only opened in 1887. Although the matron of this workhouse was unable to identify the body, a workhouse inmate named Mary Ann Monk positively identified the body as Mary Ann Nichols at 7:30 p.m. the same day. During the official inquest into Nichols' death, Dr. Llewellyn testified. 5 of the teeth were missing, and there was a slight laceration of the tongue. There was a bruise running along the lower part of the jaw on the right side of the face. That may have been caused by a blow from a fist or pressure from a thumb. There was a circular bruise on the left side of the face, which also might have been inflicted by the pressure of the fingers. On the left side of the neck, about 1 inch below the jaw, there was an incision about 4 inches in length, and ran from a point immediately below the ear. On the same side, but an inch below, and commencing about 1 inch in front of it, was a circular incision, which terminated at a point about 3 inches below the right jaw. That incision completely severed all tissues down to the vertebrae. The large vessels of the neck on both sides were severed. The incision was about 8 inches in length. Cuts must have been caused by a long-bladed knife, moderately sharp, and used with great violence. No blood was found on the breast, either of the body or the clothes. There was no injuries about the body until just about the lower part of the abdomen. 2 or 3 inches from the left side was a wound running in a jagged manner. The wound was a very deep one, and the tissues were cut through. There were several incisions running across the abdomen. There were 3 or 4 similar cuts running downwards on the right side, all of which had been caused by a knife which had been used violently and downwards. The injuries were from left to right, and might have been done by a left-handed person. All the injuries had been caused by the same instrument. Less than a week after the murder of Mary Ann Nichols, the Star newspaper ran a salacious article about an unknown man named Leather Apron, which was the name of one of the main suspects who was believed to have murdered Nichols and 2 other women in the Whitechapel area. Sex workers in the area had described the man as always wearing a leather apron and threatening them with violence if they didn't hand over their money. A few days before the article was published, a woman went to a constable and pointed out a man she claimed was Leather Apron. Although the man was questioned, the police eventually let him go for unknown reasons. In this article, the Star described Leather Apron as the strange character who prowls about after midnight, and there was universal fear among women. Certain descriptions of Leather Apron's appearance also stoked anti-Semitism in the community, as well as a fear of foreigners from outside the community. A few days after the release of the article about the Leather Apron in the Star newspaper, on September 8th, Jack would strike again, claiming his second victim, Annie Chapman.
September mornings in London make for the perfect chilly air. As the wind blew, Annie took a moment to enjoy it. Her promiscuous occupation provides her with enough money for a comfortable night's rest and food, all one can really ask for. She didn't mind being alone. After all, she's with clients all night. Though when a man approached her at this time, she was a bit wary. She'd heard about the other woman.
You seem cold, miss. May I offer you my coat?
I'm quite fine, thank you, though.
I truly insist. Matter of fact, I don't live but a couple of streets over. If you'd like a place to stay, free of charge.
Jack noticed another woman across the street and took a smooth sidestep, almost putting himself beside Annie and keeping his face out of the other woman's gaze. He wrapped his arm around Annie's.
I'll walk you there.
I'm not sure about that. I have a place picked out already.
Jack peered over his shoulder, looking for the other woman. She was gone. He squeezed Annie's arm.
I insist.
He began walking, nearly dragging Annie behind him. As she tried to shout, he grabbed her mouth and silenced her. Dragging her just off the street, he would slice her throat so deeply, she'd hardly be able to move, let alone speak. Once she was on the ground, he did much like the last, disemboweling her. Only this time was more of a show, as pieces of her flesh and organs would be placed above either shoulder.
On September 8th, the body of Annie Chapman was discovered at approximately 6 a.m. near the steps to the doorway of the backyard of 29 Hanbury Street by an elderly resident of 29 Hanbury Street named John Davis. Davis alerted 3 men named James Green, James Kent, and Henry Holland to his discovery, before all 3 ran down Commercial Street to find a policeman, as Davis reported his discovery at the nearest police station. The men found Divisional Inspector Joseph Lunas Chandler and told him, "Another woman has been murdered." Chandler followed the men to Chapman's body before requesting the assistance of police surgeon Dr. George Baxter Phillips and more officers. Several policemen arrived within minutes. They were instructed to clear the passageway to the yard to ensure Dr. Phillips had access. Phillips arrived at Hanbury Street at approximately 6:30 a.m. Dr. Phillips was quickly able to establish a definite link between Chapman's murder and the murder of Marianne Nichols. At the inquest into Chapman's murder, Elizabeth Long described having seen Chapman standing outside 29 Hanbury Street at about 5:30 a.m. in the company of a dark-haired man wearing a brown deerstalker hat and dark overcoat, and was of a shabby genteel appearance. On the 3rd day of the inquest, Dr. George Baxter Phillips described the body as he observed it at 6:30 a.m. in the backyard of the house at 29 Hanbury Street. The left arm was placed across the left breast, legs were drawn up, the feet resting on the ground, and the knees turned upwards. The face was swollen and turned on the right side. The tongue protruded between the front teeth, but not beyond the lips. The tongue was evidently much swollen. The front teeth were perfect as far as the first molar, top and bottom, and very fine teeth they were. The body was terribly mutilated. The stiffness of the limbs was not marked, but was evidently commencing. He noticed that the throat was dissevered deeply, that the incision through the skin were jagged and reached right around the neck. On the wooden paling between the yard in question and the next, smears of blood, corresponding to where the head of the deceased lay, were to be seen. These were about 14 inches from the ground, and immediately above the part where the blood from the neck lay. The instrument used at the throat and abdomen were the same. It must have been a very sharp knife, with a thin, narrow blade. It must have been at least 6 to 8 inches in length, probably longer. He should say that the injuries could not have been inflicted by a bayonet or a sword bayonet. They could have been done by such an instrument as a medical man used for post-mortem purposes. But the ordinary surgical cases might not contain such an instrument. Those used by the slaughtermen, well ground down, might have caused them. He thought the knives used by those in the leather trade would not be long enough in the blade. There were indications of anatomical knowledge. He should say that the deceased had been dead at least 2 hours, and probably more when he first saw her, but it was right to mention that it was a fairly cool morning, and that the body would be more apt to cool rapidly from its having lost a great quantity of blood. There was no evidence of a struggle having taken place. He was positive that the deceased entered the yard alive. A handkerchief was round the throat of the deceased when he saw it early in the morning. He should say it was not tied on after the throat was cut. Chapman's throat had been cut from left to right so deeply that the bones of her vertebral column bore striations, and she had been disemboweled, with a section of the flesh from her stomach being placed upon her left shoulder, and another section of skin and flesh, plus her small intestines, being removed and placed above her right shoulder. The morgue examination revealed that part of her uterus and bladder was missing. Chapman's protruding tongue and swollen face led Dr. Phillips to believe that she may have been asphyxiated with the handkerchief around her neck before her throat was cut, and that her murderer had held her chin as he performed the act. There was no blood trail leading to the yard. He was certain that she was killed where she was found. 2 pills, which Chapman had been prescribed for a lung condition, a section of torn envelope, a small piece of frayed coarse muslin, and a comb were recovered close to her body. Also near was a leather apron partially submerged in a dish of water located close to a tap. The apron belonged to a man named John Richardson. This apron had been placed there by his mother, who had washed it a few days prior. Richardson was investigated thoroughly by the police, but was eliminated from the inquiry. Nonetheless, press reports of the discovery of this apron fueled local rumors which had first been published in the Star, following the murder of Mary Ann Nichols. From the district known as Leather Apron was responsible for the Whitechapel murders. Journalists, frustrated by the general unwillingness of the Criminal Investigation Department to reveal many details of their investigation to the public, and eager to capitalize on the increasing public unrest regarding the Whitechapel murders, frequently resorted to writing reports of questionable veracity. Imaginative descriptions of Leather Apron using crude Jewish stereotypes appeared in the press. The Manchester Guardian reported that whatever information may be in the possession of the police, they deem it necessary to keep secret. It is believed their attention is particularly directed to a notorious character known as Leather Apron. Though rival journalists dismissed these accounts as a mythical outgrowth of reporters' fancy. On September 10th, the citizens of Whitechapel got together to create the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee, led by a local builder named George Lusk. The committee was unhappy with the level of protection the local community was receiving from the Metropolitan Police, so it introduced its own system of local patrols, using hand-picked, unemployed men to monitor the streets of the East End every evening from midnight to between 4 and 5 in the next morning. The committee petitioned the government to raise a reward for information leading to the arrest of the killer, offering their own reward of £50, the equivalent of between £5,900 and £86,000 in 2021, for information leading to his capture, and hired private detectives to question witnesses independently. And now, I know this is a little bit of a different kind of episode, so we're going to leave this off right here and pick back up with the story next month. So, what do you think? Was Jack the Ripper really out there? We are on Instagram at Out There Unexplained, so make sure to follow us and tell us all of your thoughts on the cases we cover and what you'd like to hear next. Also, while you are there, check out the link tree in our bio to check out all the other forms of social media we have there, such as the Discord server. and any other things we have going on there. Make sure to rate us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts and leave us a review. It's a great way for others to find the podcast and enjoy, just like you. This episode was written and hosted by me, Trevor, with logo design by Jason Sykes and theme music from purpleplanet.com.